All right, so we are live, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, and we do have a few teachers joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And we are really excited today because we are joined by a new speaker in a place that we've never had a speaker join live from before. Anthony Colangelo is the communications coordinator and pollinator stewardship lead at Pollinator Partnership. So today he is going to walk through a whole slew of the diversity of pollinators that you can find across Canada, why they're so important, and what we can do to protect them. He's joining us live from Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories in Northern Canada, and we are so thrilled to have him for his first ever presentation. A huge shout out to Miss Hake joining us in Minnesota, and Miss Huxley's class joining us from across Brampton as well. We really appreciate you guys being here in addition to all our YouTube groups. But without further ado, let's turn it over to Anthony. Thank you so much for joining us today, and take us away.
Awesome. So I'll just share my screen here. There we go.
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thanks so much, Jesse, for having me, and for everyone tuning in. Super excited to be here. So this is the Exploring the World of Pollinators webinar. So my name is Anthony Colangelo, and I'm the Pollinator Stewardship and Communications Coordinator at Pollinator Partnership and Pollinator Partnership Canada. And so my role here is I do a lot of our social media work, and I also do a lot of outreach events as well. And so I work for Pollinator Partnership Canada, which is a branch of our parent organization, which is Pollinator Partnership. And so we are a charity here in Canada, and in the United States, we are a nonprofit. And pretty much we are the people that protect pollinators. So all of our work is dedicated to pollinator health and well-being. And we do this through collaboration with other organizations, through research, education, habitat creation, and policy. And so just a brief outline about what I'm going to talk about today. So I'll go through what pollination is, why pollination is important, who the pollinators are, the world of bees, and how to help and get involved in pollinator conservation. So to start, what is pollination? Pollination is how plants and flowers reproduce. And on a more technical note, it's when the pollen from one flower gets transferred to the reproductive organs of another flower. And this can be done through the wind, but actually majority of the plants and flowers on Earth require some kind of vector, and that can be an animal or insect, and that's where bees and pollinators come in. So they're super important for the pollination of flowers. And actually, they're actually really important for the pollination of a lot of our food crops as well. And that's kind of where this next slide is going to take us. So this is a beautiful poster that was done for Pollinator Partnership a couple years ago. It's called The Bounty of Bees, and it shows just how close of a relationship our food has with pollinators and bees. So you can see here on the very left side of the poster, we have a couple bumblebees, and they are pollinating tomato flowers, the yellow flowers there on the left. And so bumblebees are one of the few species that are able to do this because they are able to do something called buzz pollination. And that's when they actually vibrate their wing muscles at a super high frequency. And by doing this, their body vibrates, and it vibrates the whole flower, and it releases the pollen, which is super cool. So bumblebees, yeah, really important for tomato pollination. At the very top, you can see southeastern blueberry bees. So these bees are actually only around when blueberry flowers are blooming. So a very tight relationship there, and critical for the production of blueberry fruits. So again, we got our apples, blueberries, tomatoes, peppers, even pumpkins. Pumpkins rely on squash and gourd bees. So just really important for food production. Actually, 1 in 3 bites of food that we take is because of bee pollination. So here's a really cool visual depiction of just how important they are. So this is a grocery store on a normal day. You can see there's lots of colorful fruits and vegetables, and the shelves are really full. Now, this is what the grocery store would look like without bees. So you can see a lot of our fruits and vegetables are missing, and the shelves are pretty empty. I'd be pretty sad if I went to the grocery store and this is what it looked like. So I'll do that again. So this is with bees and other pollinators, and then this is without. So I've been talking a little bit about bees, but pollinators are actually a super diverse group of animals and insects. And this is another great illustration that is actually off of our most recent poster that was released a couple weeks ago. And it shows all like the main groups of pollinators. So you can see at the very top, we have our awesome lesser long-nosed bats. And bats are a great group of pollinators. They are the key pollinator of agave, which is the main ingredient in tequila. And seen in this picture is a bat flying towards a saguaro cactus. And so why is it flying towards the flower? That's because flowers produce a very sweet substance called nectar, and a lot of animals and insects like to eat it. It's nutritious for them. It actually provides them with a lot of carbohydrates, which is good for them. So this bat will go, and while it's drinking the nectar from the flower, the pollen grains will get stuck on its nose and head. And then when that bat goes to a different flower, that's when the pollination occurs. And that's how that cactus reproduces. We also have our beautiful ruby-throated hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are some of my personal favorites. I love birds. I'm a bird nerd. And if you ever have the chance to see ruby-throated hummingbirds in person, they're like little flying emeralds around, especially when the sunlight hits their feathers at the perfect angle. They're so beautiful. And so this is a hummingbird drinking from the nectar from a columbine flower. Then of course we have our butterflies. So we have the eastern tiger swallowtail butterfly, and even beetles too are pollinators. They're actually some of our most primitive pollinators. They were around before bees and are some of the first recorded flower visitors, which is really cool. So they are pollinators of ancient species such as the beautiful magnolia, trees that we see, as well as water lilies. And then of course we have our bees at the bottom here. So we have our cute furry bumblebee drinking from a thistle there on the red flower. And then at the very front, we have this green insect. And believe it or not, that's actually a bee as well. And it's on a milkweed flower. So this is what the whole poster looks like. And I love it because it shows the main categories of pollinators. Then it also shows the ecosystem services in those hexagons on the side. So again, we have pollination, nutrient cycling, biodiversity support, carbon sequestration. So carbon sequestration is when by having a lot of plant life, it actually pulls out the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this is really important because by reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you're reducing the chances of global warming. So that's really important. Erosion control. So by having lots of plants in the earth, there's lots of roots, and this kind of holds the soil together and keeps it nice and healthy. It prevents erosion. Super important. And actually this is, so resources for other wildlife. I never thought about this until I saw this poster, but bees and caterpillars, they actually are a good food source for other animals as well. I know you don't like to think of bees getting eaten or caterpillars getting eaten, but they are a good nutritious food source for birds and other mammals. So good for that as well. Food security, I kind of touched upon a little bit. Resilient for ecosystems, raw materials. So a lot of the oils such as canola oil rely heavily on honeybee pollination. Soil health, water filtration, and recreation. You know, what would be a hike in the countryside without all the beautiful wildflowers blooming? So all those wildflowers are there because of pollinators and the services they provide. So I just want to talk a little bit more about bees. Bees are the best and most efficient pollinators. And usually what the first thing to come to mind is when you think of bees are honeybees. Honeybees are really awesome. They have really cool social systems. And of course, they're great pollinators and they create delicious honey. But what a lot of people don't know is that they're not actually native to North America. They were brought over from Europe in the 17th century. And so what I really want to talk to you today is about these awesome native bees. So there are over 4,000 native bee species in just North America and 20,000 worldwide. And so this is another great illustration poster that was done for Pollinator Partnership. These are all Actually, you can download these all for free on our website. And yeah, it's just a great illustration of kind of the main categories of native bees here we have in North America. And again, if you look at the very right and very left, we have these cool green sweat bees. And a lot of people don't know that bees can be all green, which is so cool. They're often mistaken for flies, but they are in fact bees. And so I challenge you this spring and summer to just take a minute and to observe flowers in your garden, or just a patch of wildflowers, and see if you can find these cool little bees and pollinators. There's actually a ton of them if you look closely. And then of course you'll see the larger species like the big bumblebees and honeybees. This is another great illustration of kind of the diversity of bees we have in North America. So this is our largest species, called the Xylocopa carpenter bee. They're really big and really cool. And then it's right next to our smallest species called the fairy bee. And they grow to about 2 millimeters in size, so very tiny, but both are super important pollinators. Obviously, like the carpenter bees, they just get covered in pollen whenever they're visiting flowers. And the little fairy bees, they visit specialized flowers and they fit perfectly into the flower to pollinate it. So really cool pollination systems there. And so I also wanted to talk to you about how, not all bees live in hives, and they're not all social, with workers and queens. Actually, a lot of bees are solitary, meaning that each female is her own queen and she'll create her own nest without the help from anyone else. So if you look at this picture here on the bottom left, kind of like the underground nest, that there is a mining bee, which are super cool. And the female bee there has created her own little condo system underground. And so each tunnel kind of ends off in a little apartment. And you can see in this kind of blown up picture that orange ball. So that there is called a pollen ball. And the female creates it by going out and foraging on flowers and eating pollen and nectar, and then creating that little pollen ball. So she'll lay that down, and then on each pollen ball, she'll lay one single egg. That egg will hatch a larva or little baby, as you can see there, that white larva will eat the pollen ball for nutrients and eventually grow up into an adult bee. That adult bee will mine its way back out from underground, and then will come out from underground and take on the world as a new mining bee. So super cool lifestyle. At the top there, we have our carpenter bee. And they're super cool because they actually have really strong jaws, and they're able to vibrate their body. So almost like a drill to drill into old dead wood. And then that's where they lay their eggs. And then on the right side here, we have our leafcutter bee. And if anyone has any rose bushes and has ever seen these perfect semicircles cut out of the leaves, that is probably the work of a leafcutter bee. They use their strong and large jaws like scissors, and they'll actually cut little leaf bits out. And what they do is they'll bring those leaf bits, they'll carry them all the way to their nest. Then they use it as a perfect lining for insulation and protection, which is super cool. So this is just kind of an example of how diverse these lifestyles are, and how diverse they are. There's just so many different species. But at the end of the day, and I'm sure you've all heard, bees and other pollinators, their populations are in decline. And so pollinators need your help. There's a ton of reasons why their populations are in decline. A big one is habitat loss, but some other factors are, improper use of pesticides, global warming, and disease. And so when all these factors are combined, it really puts a pressure on pollinators. And so, it's tough for them. It puts a lot of pressure on their populations. But luckily at Pollinator Partnership Canada and Pollinator Partnership, we have some fantastic programs that you can get involved in that are really easy to get involved in and really make a real difference in pollinator conservation. So the first one I want to go over is our eco-regional planting guides. So we have a bunch of planting guides for the US and for Canada, and they're amazing. At the end of each guide, there's about 100 plant species that are really good to plant for pollinators. and that'll bring pollinators to your yard and garden. And they are regionally specific. So they're meant for your region. And it's a great way, especially in these times of social distancing, planting a garden or planting a garden is a great way to, get out in nature, either solo or with your immediate family, and to bring pollinators to your yard. So, and you can see here on the right-hand side, this bee picture. All our planting guides are bee approved. This is actually a great picture taken by my colleague Amber Barnes, showing a bumblebee covered in pollen, looking over one of our planting lists, which was great timing for a picture. National Pollinator Week. So definitely participate in National Pollinator Week. This is an annual celebration of pollinators that happens every year in June. And so you can see on the map here, these are events that happened last year. There were a lot of bee safaris and bee ID activities, and just people, hosting gatherings. But unfortunately right now, because of the circumstances, we can't do that. So we are doing a virtual Pollinator Week. And so what we want you to do is populate this map, which can be found on our website, with your own personal pollinator story and how you are celebrating pollinators. And so we also like to do building and monument light ups. So last year we had the CN Tower lit up orange and yellow, which is really cool. And we also had the Empire State Building a couple years ago. Then we have our Be Smart School Garden and curriculum kits. These are a fantastic tool for teachers to use with their classroom. And these were made with the hopes of getting students outdoors to get more in touch with nature and to learn more about how pollinators are important to our food and ecosystems. So these can be ordered on our website online. And what they have is great lesson plans. They have materials for lessons and materials to plant your very own pollinator garden. And I think it's the best way to learn too when you're doing hands-on activities. So by actually getting outside and planting a garden, or even just observing, a patch of wildflowers or a garden and seeing all the amazing insects and animals that are visiting is a great way to just learn about biodiversity and pollinators and nature. So definitely a great resource. This is one of my favorites. It's our new Insight Citizen Science app. So it can be downloaded on your iPhone right now, and I believe we are working on an Android version. So this app will teach you how to identify different bee species as well as different pollinators, all within the app. And how it works is you observe a patch of wildflowers for 5 minutes, and you actually tap on the bee or pollinator that you see. So it's actually really fun to use. And it provides Pollinator Partnership with some awesome data about which bees and which pollinators are in certain locations. So it's fun to use and it's very useful. It provides us with a lot of data. You should definitely download it. And it's also another great tool to use during these times of social distancing because you can just go out by yourself, find some wildflowers when they're blooming and see what you find. And then finally, we have our Keep Going, Keep Growing webpage, which we just released a couple of weeks ago for Earth Day. This is a page on our website that has, I think, 10 different activities that were handpicked by our Pollinator Partnership staff. They include fun scavenger hunts, cool crossword puzzles, even some recipes that involve ingredients that were pollinated by pollinators. So definitely a great webpage to check out and a good way to do activities that are pollinator themed. And with that, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm really happy to be here and I'll take any questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Anthony, for this awesome presentation. You mentioned Amber Barnes too, so a shout out to her, because without her meeting me, we wouldn't have been doing this presentation. So if Amber happens to be watching, that's fantastic. We're going to dive in with questions in a minute, and we have a crazy audience for this. So between our live groups and YouTube, it's over 100 people watching from New York, Maine, Wisconsin, Delaware, Washington, Illinois, Idaho, Minnesota, and across Ontario, which is wild. So huge shout out to all of you guys for tuning in today. That's awesome. For everyone on YouTube, share your questions in the chat bar, and I'll take as many as possible. And for our live groups, for Ms. Huxley's class, just let me know in the chat bar if you have a question, and I'll come to you guys directly. Miss Hake, what we're going to do is start with you. So joining us in Hopkins, Minnesota. So Miss Hake, if you want to kick us off with a question, you are demuted. Go for it.
Hi there. I put a question in the chat from our friend Isaac here. He wants to know what bees' nests are made out of.
Cool.
What bees' nests are made out of? That's a great question. And so bees' nests can be a whole variety of different materials. So of course you have honeybees, and their nests are made out of a wax that they produce. But then you have like the native bees that I was talking about. So the leafcutter bees, their nests are made out of those leaf bits that they cut and bring back to their little nesting cavities. And some bee nests are made out of dirt, like they mine into the ground. And so soil composition is what they're made of. And I think, yeah, bumblebees too, they make their nest out of like underneath leaf piles. So there's a whole variety of materials that bees nest in, which is really cool. That's a great question.
That's a great question to kick us off. Note two, we've got Mr. Carvalho joining us from the border of Peru and Chile. So we've got, this is an international, it's a multi-international. We are intercontinental with this pollinator program, Anthony. Trial by fire. All right, I'm gonna go to Ms. Huxley's group. We're still waiting for some more questions on YouTube, but Ms. Huxley, if you wanna come up and share one, go for it.
Yes, I was wondering if Anthony could talk to the subject of mason bees.
Yeah.
Yeah, mason bees are really cool. So they are early season bees. I've only ever seen a couple personally, but they are really cool with how they carry pollen. They carry pollen on the underside of their belly, which is, so in order to identify bees, you look at where they carry pollen. So a lot of bees carry pollen on their legs, or some carry pollen on their bellies. And in this case, mason bees fall under that category. Yeah, and they also nest in cavities. So you can actually build nest boxes, and mason bees are one of the species that will visit them, as well as leafcutter bees. So if you see those nest boxes kind of at the store, first of all, you want to make sure that they're the right dimensions. The tube lengths need to be the right length in order for the female bee to lay the proper amount of eggs. So important about that. We actually have the right dimensions and good resources for that on our website. But yeah, if you're planting or you're putting in a nest box, mason bees are one of the species that will visit. Really cool because they have kind of a darker green sheen to them when you see them in person. So they're not like the classic yellow and black striped bee. They have that dark sheen, and they also have kind of like pale fur or hair on them, which is really good at collecting pollen. So really cool type of bee.
I love how much you love all these individual species. It's amazing, and it shines through in the whole presentation. So way to go, Anthony.
Going like hiking, when I'm out hiking and seeing bees and I'm like with some of my friends, I'm always like, oh, look at that bee, look at that. I get pretty excited about them.
2-kilometer hike takes 4 hours. Anthony, if you want to come out of screen share actually so we can see you, that would be fantastic. I see that we've got Thumira, Jennifer, and Kim Noor, who have all sent in questions. I'll come to you guys in just a second. I wanted to take one from Mr. Bordaluzzi joining us in Thunder Bay. So we wanted to ask, do different species of bees pollinate more than other ones?
That's another really good question. So the answer would be yes. Some bees are very specific with the flowers that they visit. They're called pollen specialists. So sometimes there's really tight relationships with a bee and a flower. That flower can only be pollinated by one certain type of bee, and that bee will only go to one certain type of flower. And then you have generalists such as honeybees or bumblebees, which will go to any type of flower.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, Olga wanted to know a question we were bound to get eventually. Anthony, do you have a favorite kind of pollinator?
Oh,
No pressure.
Because I'm such a bird lover, I would say the hummingbirds are my favorites.
Oh, you're betraying bees in the middle of the session. Well, there you go. But yes, for all our students, certainly in Brampton and Minnesota as well, if you guys get a chance to see a hummingbird this spring, summer, they're just some of the most amazing animals in the world. And I hope you guys can get outdoors and do that. All right, let's go to Thumira as a first question. Go right ahead.
What's the difference between hornets and wasps?
Yeah.
That's a good question, which I might have to do a little bit more research on. I do know, what I can tell you though, is that bees evolved from wasps. So wasps are kind of like the cousins of bees. Wasps and hornets are carnivores, so they eat other insects and they eat a lot of pest insects, whereas bees have evolved to be vegetarian, so they only eat pollen and nectar. In terms of the difference between a hornet and a wasp, that is a question I have to research. That's a very good question.
No, I love questions like that are sort of something that, you know, can promote learning from students at home too. And I think one of the reasons that might have prompted that question is, of course, lately in the news, we've had this murder hornet. So if you could speak to that, that would be fantastic.
About sort of I missed the
Yeah, no, so that's like recently we've been hearing in the news across Canada and the States that there's a murder hornet, a giant hornet from Asia that's, you know, arrived on our shores and is distressing a lot of people. Could you explain a little bit about what that might be? Any information we have, you know, that you can share? So
that as well is kind of one of those things where I'm also still in the process of researching. So I don't have too much to say about the murder hornets, but I know they have taken control of our media right now. But what I probably can say is that because they are invasive here, invasive species, you never want invasive species, you know, in any area because they put a pressure on our native bee species. So maybe like where the murder hornets are native to, they play a really important ecological role. So you don't necessarily want to villainize them, but here they don't. They're not meant for our native environment. So that's where the problems occur.
Very thoughtful answer. Thank you, Anthony. All right, I'm going to go back to Ms. Hake before we go keep having Ms. Huxley's students tune in. So Ms. Hake, if you have another question for us, go for it.
We're a second grade team. So what animals besides bees and hummingbirds and wasps are pollinators?
And Anthony, if you want to bring up that slide again and show us that cool picture you had, you're welcome to do that. That would be cool.
For sure. Share the screen again.
Quick note while you're doing that, I've shared in the YouTube chat bar and in the bar here the Pollinators website. So if you guys want to learn more, there's some great resources there and ways to get involved. So you check that out.
And so the question was, what animals are pollinators that aren't bees or butterflies and hummingbirds?
Yep.
Yeah, so actually one that's not on this picture are, there are actually honey possums that are pollinators. So that's one of the few mammal species that are pollinators, which are really cool. And they come out at night, and they're actually like some of the cutest animals that I've ever seen. They kind of have like this long little snout, and they're very small. And they pollinate special flowers. I believe in Australia, that's where they're native to. And so if you can search a picture of honey possum, they're very cute. And that is a pollinator that wasn't mentioned. That is not like a classic pollinator like a bee or a butterfly.
Very cool. Thank you, Anthony. All right, let's go to Michael in Ms. Huxley's class. If you have a question, let's just demute. So Michael, you might need to demute yourself at the top of your screen, and then you should be good to go. Perfect. Oh, your mic's not working, man. So, but you did type in your question, so I'll share it for you. I'm sorry that the mic's like you're demuted. It's just not working today. So his question is, why are carpenter bees so big, Anthony?
Yeah, so bees vary in size, again, according to the flowers that they visit. So sometimes if a bee specializes on a certain flower that's very small, usually that bee will also be very small, like that small fairy bee that I mentioned. So carpenter bees are generalists, so they go for all kinds of flowers. And so by being bigger, it's easier for them to visit a variety of flowers and collect more pollen.
Fantastic, thanks, Anthony. All right, we have this question from one of the students in Ms. Huxley's class and from Ms. Bordaluzzi online. What attracts pollinators to a plant? Why do they go there in the first place?
Yeah, so the nectar and pollen on a flower is what really attracts pollinators. So just like humans, bees and other pollinators, they require a balanced diet, believe it or not. And so different flowers have different nutrition levels. And so they need a balanced diet of certain proteins and certain carbohydrates. So the nectar, which is probably the most attractive substance that a plant produces, provides bees with their carbs. And then when they eat the pollen on the flower, they get all their proteins, which is really cool. And that's the importance of planting a whole variety of species as opposed to just planting just one type of flower. Because it'd be the same for us. Would you just want to eat or, mac and cheese every day? Maybe you would. Mac and cheese is amazing, but, for the rest of your life, or would you want a whole variety of different types of foods, So that's the same with bees. They want a whole variety of different pollens and nectars from different flowers. So that's what they're attracted to, pollen nectar.
Normal mac and cheese, sharp cheddar mac and cheese. I mean, the possibilities are endless, really.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go to Aji-san. If you have a question, go for it. You're demuted. Man.
How many types of bees are there in the world?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's approximately 20,000 different types of bees in the world.
Which is crazy, by the way. So for our students, if you put this in context, all the mammals, which is like all the primates, bats, rodents, antelope, all those things you've ever seen when you go to the zoo, there's about 6,000 kinds of them. So there are 20,000 kinds of bees, more than triple the number of types of bees than there are all those things that you sort of think of as big charismatic animals, which is really cool. So it's a huge diversity. Insect world is amazing. And in fact, I'd encourage our students to check out National Geographic. Just had a recent whole issue dedicated to insects and sort of why they're being lost around the world, which leads us to a question from YouTube, Anthony, from, who did we get this from? Elisa wants to know, have scientists figured out why there's been a decline in bee populations?
Sorry, was it why or how?
Why, yeah, why, or how? I mean, just explain in general, sort of the loss of bee populations and what's going on, if you can.
Yeah, so right now, a lot of the research is done for honeybees. And so they've looked into it because honeybees are really important for our agricultural systems and pollinating our crops. And so with declining honeybee populations, they started to really want to get more research on that and figure out, why they're declining in the hopes to keep our food production up high. But again, native or honeybees are managed by humans, just like other livestock. And so while they're super important, we need to do more research on our native bee populations. So those are the populations that haven't had too much research on them yet. But some preliminary research has shown that those populations are declining. So that's the area that we need to focus on. But in terms of why, it's because a lot of it's to do with our food production and the pollination services there.
Thanks, Anthony. All right, we're going to take a few more questions. I'm going to go back to Ms. Hake for a second to take one more from Ms. Huxley and a YouTube question. So Ms. Hake, if you have another question for us, go for it.
Do bees see differently than humans?
Oh, cool question.
That is a really cool question. And actually, we, I think it was at the Royal Ontario Museum, we were doing a demonstration and they had, or it might've been at the some fair, and they had this cool bee box where you can look into it and see how bees see flowers. And so, if I'm not mistaken, they see infrared. So a flower to us, these beautiful colors, but to them, it looks like almost like a bullseye. So when they're flying around it, the flowers are lit up almost. It's really cool. I encourage you to actually check that out on the internet as well. It's super cool. It is like an infrared target for them to land on.
We were talking about this in the our program the other day with Rouge Park and flowers, is that if you look at a lot of the middle of flowers, and you can do this at home, you'll notice it's often a different color in the middle. Well, to insects, it's much shinier. It's almost like a beacon of light in the middle. It goes like, wow, that's where I need to land, landing strip. So it's really, really cool. I'm glad we got that question. And in fact, this is a wild thing in general to think that animals see in different wavelengths than we do. So turtles we know see differently, certain birds see differently, and it just depends on where on the spectrum they are that they see the world in a totally different way. All right, Miss Huxley, I'm going to come to you straight, Miss Huxley. If you have a question for one of your students you particularly like, go for it.
Whoa.
No pressure.
I was hoping that you were watching. I haven't been.
Don't worry, I can share one then.
Yep,
We've got a few. So we've got from Navin wanted to know how big are the biggest bees, and you showed a cool example of this, Anthony, with a picture of bee species next to each other. But do we know how big the biggest bee is?
The biggest bee in the world was actually, they just found it again after years of it being missing last year, and it's a type of leafcutter bee. I can't remember how big it was, but from the picture it looked pretty big. Probably like a couple inches big. I know our carpenter bees are probably like an inch or yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact measurements on those, but
My favorite, so you talked about wasps and bees being related earlier, and they're all in the same family with ants as well, called Hymenoptera. And my favorite example of sort of sizes of insects is that an entire colony of the smallest ant in the world could fit inside the head of one of the biggest ants in the world. So that's just a wild thought. I encourage you to check that out. There's some really great resources out there. And again, Pollinator Partnership has some really, really great programs for you guys to check out online. All right, I want to end with the most important question, sort of, I think, why a lot of us are here. And I know you explained this at the end of your presentation, but if you could rehash it. Miss Bortoluzzi's class wants to know, Sophia wants to know, why are pollinators so important and what can we do to protect pollinators?
Yeah, pollinators are super important because they pollinate majority of the flowers on Earth. And they are super important to our food systems because they pollinate majority of our crops that we rely on for food. And what we can do to protect them. The number one thing you can do to protect and help pollinators is plant for them. We need to rehabilitate the land and get back to that native planting, diverse variety of flowers. That is the best way we can protect our bees and pollinators.
Fantastic. And so out of curiosity, are people able to easily find these sort of wildflowers? Is there a resource where people can find what the plants that would, they need to plant near them would be?
Yep, so if you use our eco-regional guides, it provides you with the exact species and flowers that you want to plant in your area. And I believe also on our website, we have like local nurseries that will provide those native plants for you.
Amazing. So I encourage you all to check that out. That's really fantastic. And you guys really do have some of the best resources out there. So for all our students joining live and on YouTube, check that out when you're done. Again, it's in both chat bars, so there's lots of ways to find out more. Anthony, this has been fantastic. And what we do at the end of every presentation is I'm going to demute the microphones of every one of our students and teachers joining us. And if boys and girls, if you guys could get ready to join me in saying a huge thank you to Anthony and to Pollinator Partnership today, you are all demuted. Go for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah, really attentive group today. So thank you so much for all our students. Great questions from all. And again, one of the most diverse in terms of states we've ever had for this program. So we really appreciate you all tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And thanks again, Anthony.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.